Disclaimer: this content is strictly intended for mature audiences only. It contains themes of emotional conflict, infidelity, betrayal, and adult relationships that may not be suitable for younger viewers or sensitive individuals. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The story you are about to hear is based on true events, adapted for storytelling purposes, and is designed to highlight the emotional consequences of choices made in vulnerable moments. This is not meant to promote or glorify infidelity in any form. It's a raw, emotional, human story, told with honesty, suspense, and intensity. I used to think I had the kind of life most people quietly wished for. A beautiful home tucked in a quiet neighborhood, a husband who provided well, and a reputation for being the woman who had it all together. People admired our marriage from the outside. Smiles at family dinners, polite conversations with neighbors, matching outfits at holiday parties. To them, we were perfect. But behind those closed doors, I was disappearing, slowly, quietly, like a photograph left too long in the sun. My husband, Richard, was a good man. I'll never take that from him. He worked hard, provided everything material we could need. But somewhere between his business trips, the late-night phone calls, and the cold goodbyes in the mornings, he forgot how to see me. I was no longer the woman he courted, no longer the spark in his tired eyes. What started as quiet frustration eventually turned into numb routine. Days blurred into nights, and the warmth between us had long since frozen over. Then came Caleb, Richard's son from his first marriage. He had been living at college for the past few years, but things hadn't worked out, and now he was back home, just for a while, or so they said. I remembered him as a lanky, awkward teenager, always buried in his phone or his games. But when I saw him standing in the doorway with his bags that first night, I froze, not because of awkwardness, but because I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the scrawny boy I remembered. In his place was a man, broad-shouldered, tall, confident in the way he carried himself. His jaw was sharper now, his voice deeper, and his eyes held something unreadable, almost guarded. He nodded at me politely, gave his father a hug, and went upstairs to settle in. I told myself it was nothing. Just surprise. People grow up. But later that night, when I passed by his room and caught a glimpse of him changing his shirt, that surprise turned into something else. Something I shouldn't have felt, not for him. I shook it off. I reminded myself that I was tired, lonely, restless. The mind plays tricks when the heart's been neglected for too long. I went to bed alone, as usual, pretending that everything in my life was fine. But that night was the first time I dreamed of someone other than my husband. And it wasn't the last. The days that followed felt like living two separate lives inside the same house. By morning, I was the composed wife, tidying up, smiling politely, pretending everything was fine. By night, I was just a hollow version of myself, lying awake next to a husband who barely noticed if I was even there. Richard was consumed with work. His laptop was more familiar with his touch than I was. Every conversation between us felt mechanical, like two strangers trying to make small talk at an empty bus stop. But the strange part was, I didn't feel invisible to everyone, not anymore. It was subtle at first, those passing glances with Caleb. Maybe I imagined it, I thought. But then there were those moments that felt heavier, loaded with something neither of us dared name. Like that afternoon when we both reached for the same glass in the kitchen and our fingers brushed. It was nothing, but it was everything. I snatched my hand away quickly, but not before I felt the warmth of his skin against mine. That feeling followed me the whole day, like a secret I was too afraid to open. What made it worse was how different Caleb was now, not just physically but emotionally. He spoke differently, listened more carefully when I talked. He wasn't just polite out of obligation, there was something else behind his eyes, like he understood me in a way no one else in that house did. One evening, I found him outside on the porch, sitting alone, nursing a beer. The air was cool, the sky painted with soft purples and blues. Without thinking, I stepped outside too, standing a few feet away, feeling ridiculous for needing to be near him. "Can't sleep?" I asked softly. He glanced at me, half smiling. "Not really. Feels weird being back." I nodded. "Yeah, everything feels weird lately." And just like that, we weren't strangers anymore. We talked that night, not about anything inappropriate, not yet, but about life, disappointments, frustrations. I didn't realize how starved I was for someone to simply listen to me without judgment or distraction. His attention felt dangerous, like walking barefoot on broken glass but not caring about the cuts. But I knew where this was headed, even if I refused to admit it out loud. There was a line between us, invisible but electric, and with every passing day that line became harder to respect. I told myself I was imagining things. That I was lonely. That I was weak. But when I caught him looking at me again, this time with something unmistakable in his eyes, I realized I wasn't imagining a thing. And that terrified me more than anything else in the world. It was almost as if the universe itself conspired to leave us alone together. Richard had barely unpacked from his last trip when he was called away again, some urgent meeting in another city. He kissed my cheek goodbye, barely noticing how stiff I'd gone beneath his touch. And just like that, it was Caleb and me in that big, empty house. At first, I tried to stick to the safe zones. I kept busy, laundry, dishes, meaningless errands. I even texted friends I hadn't spoken to in months, desperate for distraction. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore the feeling crawling under my skin every time I heard Caleb's footsteps upstairs. Every sound he made became heightened. A door closing. The water running in the shower. His low, steady voice whenever he answered a call. Everything felt sharper, more alive, almost like the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. One night, after dinner, I poured myself a glass of wine, maybe 2, maybe 3, and curled up on the couch with a book I wasn't really reading. The hum of the television in the background filled the silence, but not the emptiness inside me. Caleb came down the stairs quietly, wearing just a plain t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair slightly messy like he'd just gotten out of bed. "You're still up?" he asked, his voice lower, softer than usual. I nodded. "Can't sleep." Without asking, he sat at the other end of the couch. Not too close, not too far. Just enough to make my skin prickle. We talked again that night, light conversation, silly things at first. Favorite movies. Embarrassing childhood memories. And then it got deeper. "Do you ever feel stuck?" I asked suddenly, surprising even myself with how raw my voice sounded. He looked at me carefully. "Yeah. All the time." Silence sat between us for a long, heavy moment. I could feel the weight of his eyes on me, steady and intense, like he was holding something back. "I shouldn't be here right now," he said, almost to himself. And yet, neither of us moved. The moment that changed everything came later that week. It was raining outside, loud and steady, the kind of rain that makes the whole world feel quieter. I stood by the kitchen window, lost in thought, when I heard his footsteps behind me. I turned, and we were suddenly too close. The electricity I'd been feeling for days surged between us like a live wire. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us moved away. His hand brushed my waist, so gently it could have been accidental, but it wasn't. I should have pulled back. I should have said something. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, breathing him in like the first gasp of air after being underwater for too long. And in that moment, I knew, something between us had shifted, and there was no going back. It's strange how one moment can split a life in two, the before and the after. That night was exactly that. I told myself I wouldn't let anything happen. I told myself I was stronger than the loneliness, stronger than the heat I felt every time Caleb looked at me like he could see right through all my defenses. But I was lying to myself, and deep down, I knew it. The rain kept falling outside, steady and rhythmic like a warning I refused to hear. I could feel his breath on my skin, could smell that faint scent of soap and something warm I couldn't name. I don't even know who moved first, maybe it was both of us at the same time, but suddenly his mouth was on mine, and all the walls I'd built came crashing down in one desperate, shattering second. It wasn't soft or careful, not at first. It was raw, urgent, like we'd both been starving and didn't even realize it until that kiss. His hands were in my hair, my fingers clutching the fabric of his t-shirt like I needed to hold on or I'd fall apart completely. For a split second, I thought of Richard. Of vows and rings and all the promises we'd made. But the thought was distant, blurred by the way Caleb's lips traced down my neck, the way his hands found the curves of my body like they already belonged there. For the first time in years, I felt alive, wanted, desired, needed. It was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. When it was over, we sat on the edge of my bed, both of us breathing hard, the silence between us louder than any storm outside. I wrapped a blanket around myself, shaking, not from cold, but from the weight of what I'd just done. Caleb glanced at me, guilt flashing behind his eyes, but something else too. Something dangerous. "This can't happen again," I whispered, though even as I said it, I didn't believe myself. He didn't argue. He just nodded, standing up, running a hand through his hair. Right. But we both knew that was a lie. The next morning, nothing looked different. The house was still standing. The dishes still needed washing. The world outside kept moving like it always had. But everything inside me had shifted. I thought the worst part was what we did. But the truth is, the worst part was how badly I wanted to do it again. And as if fate was laughing at me, that was the day I got the text from Richard, change of plans. "I'm coming home early. Need to talk." My stomach twisted. Everything that felt thrilling the night before now felt like a slow-burning fuse, inching toward the explosion I knew was coming. The line we'd crossed wasn't just broken. It was gone. The hours that followed felt like living inside a glass box, transparent, fragile, waiting for everything to shatter. I walked around the house pretending nothing had happened, folding towels, tidying up the kitchen, fixing my hair as if neatness could somehow erase the weight of what I had done. But underneath it all, my heart wouldn't stop pounding. My skin still burned with the memory of Caleb's touch, his mouth, his hands. And yet right behind that thrill was something darker, shame. I kept telling myself that this was a one-time mistake. A desperate reaction to a long season of being ignored, unloved, untouched. But no matter how many excuses I tried to build, they crumbled the second I caught Caleb watching me again. It wasn't just lust anymore. It was curiosity. Desire. Maybe even something deeper, though I was too afraid to name it. What scared me even more was how easily we slipped back into those stolen glances, those casual accidental touches. One evening I passed him in the narrow hallway and his hand brushed the small of my back, sending a wave of heat straight through me. We didn't speak about what happened, but our eyes said everything. We both wanted more. But while passion clouded my mind, paranoia was beginning to seep into my bones. Every vibration of my phone sent a cold shock through my chest. Every unexpected knock at the door made my stomach twist. I jumped when the neighbor's dog barked, convinced someone, anyone, was about to find out what I'd done. Then came the worst part. I made the mistake of glancing at Caleb's phone one afternoon when it buzzed on the table. It was a text from one of his friends. "Bro, tell me you're not seriously messing with her." My throat closed. Had he told someone? Did they know? He caught me reading it, his face tightening with frustration. "It's not what you think," he muttered, shoving the phone into his pocket. "I didn't tell them anything." They just guessed. Guessed. That was worse than knowing. Now, it wasn't just guilt eating me alive, it was the risk of exposure. And then, like life wasn't cruel enough already, another text appeared on my phone. From Richard. Landing tomorrow. We need to talk about us. Us. 2 simple letters, suddenly feeling heavier than the whole house around me. Did he know? Did someone tell him? Or was it just coincidence, a husband finally waking up to the fact that his wife was slipping away? I didn't know. And that terrified me more than anything. As the hours ticked by, I realized something that chilled me deeper than guilt or lust ever could. I wasn't afraid of losing Richard. I was afraid of what losing Caleb would feel like. And that was a betrayal far worse than anything I'd done with my body. The next day was suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every ticking second on the wall clock, felt like the countdown to a disaster I couldn't stop. I cleaned the house twice. I rewashed dishes that were already spotless. I folded clothes that didn't need folding. It wasn't about cleanliness, it was about control. Everything inside me felt like it was spiraling, and I needed something to hold on to. But nothing could prepare me for the way the front door opened that afternoon. Richard stepped in, suitcase in one hand, keys dangling from the other. He looked tired, older somehow, like the stress of the past few months had carved lines into his face I hadn't noticed before. I froze, just like I had that night in the kitchen. The weight of my betrayal clung to my skin like sweat, invisible but suffocating. "Hey," he said, voice flat. No warmth. No smile. Just tired. I managed a weak hi. Then came the words I didn't expect, "We need to talk." Not "I missed you." Not "How are you?" Just straight to the storm. Caleb wasn't in the room, but I knew he was upstairs. I could almost feel the tension radiating from the ceiling like heat rising from pavement. Everything in me screamed to run, to make up an excuse, to delay this conversation until I could untangle myself from the mess I'd created. But life doesn't wait for you to get your heart in order. Richard sat down at the dining table, setting his phone face down on the wood, his fingers tapping the edge like he was working up to something. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he finally said, eyes not meeting mine. "About us." My stomach twisted again. I braced myself for accusations, for questions, for the confrontation I knew was coming. But instead, what came out of his mouth next was worse in a way I didn't expect. "I'm not happy," he admitted. "I don't think you are, either. We've been roommates for months, maybe longer. I've been gone more than I've been home, and I don't know how to fix it." For a second, just a second, I felt guilty for what I'd done. Not because I loved him, but because in that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time in months. A man drowning, and I had stopped throwing him lifelines a long time ago. "I don't know if we can fix it," I whispered, barely able to meet his eyes. He nodded slowly. "Maybe not." The weight of what wasn't said filled the room more than what was. He didn't know, not yet. But he knew enough to realize we were broken beyond repair. And then, like fate couldn't help but twist the knife, Caleb came downstairs. His eyes flickered from his father to me, reading the tension instantly. And for the first time I wasn't sure who I was more afraid of hurting. The weight in that room could have broken bones. Richard sat at the table, staring at his hands. Caleb stood at the bottom of the stairs, frozen mid-step, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between me and his father. And I stood between them, literally and emotionally, feeling like a trapped animal with nowhere left to run. The silence was unbearable. It was Caleb who broke it first. "Everything okay?" His voice was steady, too steady, like he was holding something in by sheer force. Richard finally looked up at his son, and for the first time in all the years I'd known them, I saw something new between them, resentment. Not because of what had happened, he didn't know that yet, but something deeper, older, something I hadn't been paying attention to. The way fathers and sons sometimes speak in unfinished sentences, in glances, in buried disappointments. "Yeah," Richard answered, his voice hoarse. "Just talking." Caleb nodded, but I saw it, his fists clenching at his sides, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. He was waiting for me to say something, to explain, to choose. And in that single heartbeat, I realized that the question hanging in the room wasn't if we would get caught, it was who I was going to betray next. And then it happened. Richard's phone buzzed on the table, and without thinking, he flipped it over to read the notification. His face changed instantly. It was subtle, but unmistakable, the tightening around his mouth, the narrowing of his eyes. I couldn't breathe. "What's this?" he asked, voice low, deadly calm. I moved closer to look, and my heart nearly stopped. It was a screenshot of a message thread. My name. Caleb's name. And a text from one of Caleb's friends that read, "Bro, this is crazy. If he finds out, you're dead." Everything around me shattered in slow motion. My ears rang. My skin went cold. Richard stood, the chair scraping violently against the floor. "Is this what I think it is?" I tried to speak, but my throat locked up. Words scrambled around in my mind, but none of them formed a full sentence. Caleb took a step forward, opening his mouth to say something, anything, but Richard's look silenced him before the first syllable left his lips. I had never seen that look on my husband's face before. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. And in that split second, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the deepest kind of betrayal, blood betrayal. His wife. His son. "You two," Richard said through gritted teeth, "are going to tell me exactly how long this has been going on." The room spun. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Couldn't lie my way out. The truth was no longer a hidden thing between stolen glances and midnight kisses. It was out. And it was ugly.